Welcome to another edition of Cattle Chatter. I'm Susan Littlefield. Well, we could call it the struggle bus, whatever you want to look at. The pressure is there on this cash market. And as Brad put it, a little crease going on in the dam. We're going to talk about what's going on in the cash market. We'll look at some basis as well, as we'll also focus on who's creeping up behind to maybe steal some of the thunder from the cattle. Again, Brad Kooima joins us. He's with Kooima Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So let's first of all talk about the fact that cash is not exactly where we'd want it to be this week.
No, it certainly is not. Susan, thanks again for having me on. I enjoy doing this with you a lot. For weeks on end, you and I would lead the show with, geez, cash is king. If the board tries to break, you get to the end of the week and, cash is 3 to 5 higher. We had several weeks where cash was 3 to 5 higher, 4 in a row, what my memory says. All good things come to an end at some point. Now, one of the things that is a little bit alarming to me or disturbing or concerning, among 45 or 50 notes I've got stuck around my desk here, one of them says up on the stairs and down on the elevator, meaning that usually the markets go up somewhat slowly, but when they tip over, they go down much more quickly. I'm not rooting for that, but I'm just talking. Cash bids today. There's some cattle that are trading in western Nebraska, I understand, at $230. That's down $6 or so. There was some cattle trading yesterday afternoon in Kansas at $223. That's at least 6 to 10 lower. I don't know. I'm not sure if the quality of those cattle really is a good barometer, that I don't know if the market's going to be quite that bad. But yeah, so it wasn't, 2 weeks ago, we were 242, right? And then last week started at, went to 38,765 by the end of the week. And now we're, continuing that. And it is what it is. I'm afraid what happens here is that, let's say you're a calf fed guy, a guy that feeds only calves. You haven't sold any cattle on this big record high market yet. Your calves are finally fat or almost so, and you don't want to miss out on this deal. And so you're an easy seller. And with the futures market at a discount, with the basis the way it is, if you're a hedger, you are either more further incentivized to be that easy seller. So all this hedge community that loves this weak basis, you're not thinking. There's more to it than that. I think that the weak basis also drags the cash market down because you sell easier than you would have otherwise. So yes, you're absolutely right. The cash market has certainly lost some ground here from where we were. Still huge prices, obviously, but not quite as good as they were.
So do you think that it's opportune? I mean, we can't control what Mother Nature does, but we know that parts of Nebraska got just deluged of rain. Not my farm, totally missed us, but Grand Island, for example, flooding throughout the town. That caused some concerns with their packing plant. Then you've got the issues going on in Amarillo.
Right. We should talk about that. And it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but if there's going to be a plant problem, it seems like Grand Island's usually in the headlines, right? But very understandably, justifiably so, with anywhere from 5 to 6 to, I heard some reports of as much as 8 inches of rain in that area. And so it causes lagoon problems. They've got strict regulations on what has to happen there for them to be operational. So my understanding is they killed the startup cattle this morning, and then that was it. I don't know what that was, 1,000, 1,200, maybe 1,500, and they've got capacity for over 5,000. So that probably takes that packer, slows them down a little bit from having to try real hard here for a moment. Hopefully they're back in business tomorrow. I'm not sure whether they're going to run that A shift or not. I suppose it depends on how quickly they can, mitigate the issues with their lagoon. The other thing that you mentioned is, yes, there's a plant in Amarillo, also a major, and they are not killing today or tomorrow. The union there is voting right now, I understand. I think the vote is in process. Maybe one of the shifts has voted, and now they're waiting for another 1 or 2 of those segments to get done. I suspect we'll hear the news tomorrow on whether they accept the latest offer. Higher wages, less hours. I mean, it's a standard deal. I don't think there's anything that's real nuanced more than they just want better wages. But So it looks like they've decided, and a packer doesn't need a whole lot of an excuse right now, Susan, to slow the kill. I mean, the margins are poor. So they're dark today and tomorrow, trying to move some meat, get some coolers cleaned up in case they do strike next week, that, that they're a little more prepared for that. My own opinion, and it's strictly a guess, I don't think this is a long-term problem. Unions don't have near the leverage that they used to have. I got a feeling though. I hope they come to terms sooner rather than later, and we don't have to talk about that next week when we're doing this.
Yeah, no kidding. So what's your thought about the basis right now within this cattle complex?
Well, it's worth talking about because, we're in a neighborhood that's never been before, with basis as wide as it is. And you can make the same comment really on the feeder cattle, even though we don't really talk about that very much on here. But so I'm getting asked this question over and over and over and over. And so we might as well try to breach it here. There is nothing, unfortunately, within the system that is able to force convergence when the futures are below cash. When the cash is much above futures, there certainly is a method to doing that. You deliver cattle because that's your best bid. So that selling is what compresses the market and forces convergence, and you get cash down to where the futures are someplace in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, there is no demand feature, though there are some of us that are asking and prodding the CME to evaluate this contract. I mean, not to be too caustic here, but I mean, I sold cattle, what was it, 2 weeks ago, for basically the last week of June, for a price, well, $242. And why would a packer do that instead of just buying futures at $222 and expecting convergence? It's because he doesn't trust the fact that they will get convergence, right? I mean, so we've got to do something here to fix this contract up so it's more usable to not only the speculative long, but the natural long, like a packer would be, in my opinion. So, but to try to get a little more, instead of me preaching about what's wrong, let's do a little bit of a history lesson here. Back in the day, we'd almost always get convergence pretty close. We'd get cash close to futures, right? Last year, Nebraska cash, last day of June, was about 4 over. Okay. The year before that, it was within $1.50. The year before that, in 23, it was 7. So, for somebody to sit here and say you're always going to get convergence, that's not an accurate statement at all. Now, the futures will supposedly kind of sort of converge to the worst price, so if the South ends up being only 223 to 5 and futures are 222-ish, I don't know. I mean, there maybe isn't a whole lot of incentive to expect that the Junes are going to do much more than that. So, unfortunately, that's the long and the short of it. I wish I had a better way to, give you more enthusiasm, but I'm afraid that's kind of where the market is right now. I think by the middle of July, my tune will change. But for now, I'm hunkered down. I'm turtled. I'm going to be careful. So.
All right. I want to ask, as we wrap up today's show, you and I've had many the conversation on this program about the consumers and where they're seeing the push. Now, doing some reading talked about the fact that pork is just kind of waiting in the wings, ready to take over. And as food prices in general increase, there's a fear out there that might mean we're going to back off the beef and look at other proteins. What are you hearing?
It's a good question. You're going to get a C+ answer probably, or I don't know, maybe worse than that. Demand, boy, if I had the answer to that, man, oh man, we wouldn't even need to have a phone in here, right? I mean, the demand's hard to predict. I and others work very hard at, supply side fundamentals. We work hard at the demand side fundamentals too, but you can get around what supply is. Demand is more difficult. Now, I'd say this, okay? Meat demand, beef demand, contrasting to, like, say, corn, where we're going to have some reports coming up here. So you got so many bushels of corn, and then you make ethanol out of it, you export it, or you make feed out of it, basically, right? So if you put it in a bin and you don't make either one of those 3 items out of it, in a year, you still have this bin full of corn, okay? That doesn't happen that way with beef. You've got a perishable commodity that has a limited amount of freezer life, shelf life, whatever. And so demand is measured in how high can you sell a certain amount of this stuff, right? And so as I measure what's going on with demand now, I can't say that demand is bad, because look at how high we're selling, like the 90% hamburger, which seems to be where the consumer has switched to. It's like 65 cents average above a year ago, and they're still selling it. Now, the common sense part of me, I understand your question. I just watched a big rally on pork product. I mean, the last 2 weeks, pork product's gone straight up, which is somewhat seasonal, Susan. I mean,
Right.
you get on the other side of when we've talked about this, you get up when the Father's Day procurement is done, you go from middle meat advertising, telling the consumer this is what you should buy because it's cheap, whether it is or not, steaks, ribeyes, New York strips. Now you go to hamburger hot dog stuff. Right. And that, so some of that's kind of normal. My feeling would be is if we tell the consumer long enough that beef's too high, he and she will believe it, and that will slow it down. I don't know how it can't, some of this real expensive stuff. But again, I'm going to fall back on this COVID story because I really think it's a difference maker. That's the one positive thing that happened with COVID. I think this Gen X or whatever they're called, YouTube, how do you cook a steak? Because we can't go on Saturday night and spend $300, and they found out that they can cook a steak at home 2 or 3 times a week for the same cost of them going out. So I like it or not, I got to be careful how I say this, but with a strong upper middle class, there is a group of there's a segment of that populace out there that's, I'm going to eat good once in a while, and that is out there. I know that sounds a little crass, but I believe that that's also real. So,
all right, another great conversation with you this week. How does somebody reach out to talk some more?
kkbtrading.com is our website, but phone call is so much better, huh? 712-722-0023. Get to know us. I have 3 other brokers here, and they all work very hard. So give us a call if you have a minute.
All right, that is Brad Kooima joining us for another edition of Cattle Chatter.
The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading.